You are standing in your kitchen at 9:30 at night, exhausted, making a meal you do not want to make because someone asked and you said yes. Again. Your body is screaming at you to stop, to rest, to finally choose yourself. But your mouth keeps forming the words, "Of course, no problem, happy to help." And here is what makes this moment so quietly devastating. It is not just about this one meal. It is about the pattern, the decades-long pattern of putting everyone else's comfort before your own existence. You have been told your whole life that this makes you a good person. Kind, thoughtful, someone people can count on. But here is what nobody told you. There is a difference between kindness and self-erasure, and you have been paying a price that nobody can see, not even you, until now. So here is the question we are going to answer today. What is the real cost of being the nice one, not just in terms of your time or energy, but in terms of who you actually are underneath all that accommodating? And why does saying yes to everyone else always seem to mean saying no to yourself? Welcome to the Humans We Are, where we explore the hidden architecture of human behavior. We are going to go deep into the psychology of niceness, and I promise you this is not what you think it is. This is not about becoming selfish or cold. This is about understanding what is actually happening beneath the surface when you cannot stop being the person everyone needs you to be. First, we are going to uncover the neurological and psychological mechanisms that turn niceness into a survival strategy, not a choice. Then, we are going to examine the invisible costs, the parts of yourself that go missing when you spend decades performing agreeability. And finally, we are going to explore what real kindness actually looks like when it is not motivated by fear. This is not surface-level advice. We are going beneath the obvious, into the parts of human psychology that explain why some people give until there is nothing left, and why breaking that pattern feels like learning to breathe underwater. The science behind chronic niceness is more complex than most people realize. There is fascinating research from the field of attachment theory, pioneered by psychologist John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, that shows us something critical. The way you learned to be in relationships as a child, especially in your first few years of life, creates templates in your brain for how to survive emotionally. And for some people, the template that got wired in was this: your needs are a burden, and your value comes from making other people comfortable. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion reveals something even more striking. People who struggle with chronic people-pleasing often have incredibly high levels of compassion for others, but almost none for themselves. Their nervous systems literally respond differently when they imagine being kind to themselves versus being kind to others. The self-kindness creates discomfort, sometimes even panic. This explains why when someone tells you to just put yourself first, it feels impossible. It is not a lack of willpower. It is your nervous system running a program it learned decades ago. And this pattern goes even deeper than most people realize. If you are finding value in this exploration, subscribe to the Humans We Are, and there is a community here of people who think like you. Hit that like button if this is already connecting some dots. Because what we are about to uncover will reframe everything you thought you knew about why you cannot stop being nice. Let us start with what you already suspect. You know that saying yes all the time leaves you drained. You know that you feel resentful sometimes, even though you are the one who agreed to help. You know that there is a voice inside you that wonders what would happen if you just stopped, if you just said no, if you just let someone down for once. And you are right to sense this. Your body has been trying to tell you something. But here is where it gets more complicated. Because niceness is not just a habit. It is not just something you learned from a parent or a culture that rewards women for being accommodating or men for being stoic helpers. Niceness, for many people, is a sophisticated psychological defense system. Let me explain what I mean. When you were young, you learned something about how the world works. Maybe you learned that your emotions were too much, that your anger made people uncomfortable, that your needs were inconvenient. Maybe you learned that love was conditional, that you had to earn it by being good, by being helpful, by never causing problems. Or maybe you learned something even more insidious. You learned that you could control how people treated you by managing their emotions, by making sure they were never upset, by becoming the person who fixes everything. And so you developed a strategy. You learned to read rooms, to sense what people needed, to adjust yourself in real time to keep the peace. You became hypervigilant to other people's emotional states because somewhere deep in your survival brain, you learned that your safety depended on it. This is not kindness. This is hypervigilance disguised as generosity. The research on fawning as a trauma response supports this. Dr. Pete Walker's work on complex post-traumatic stress disorder identifies fawning as one of the 4 fear responses alongside fight, flight, and freeze. Fawning means appeasing and pleasing others to avoid conflict or harm. It is a survival mechanism that says, if I can make myself useful enough, agreeable enough, small enough, maybe I will be safe, maybe I will be loved. Remember at the beginning when we ask what the real cost of being the nice one is, here is the first piece of the puzzle. The cost is not just your time or your energy. The cost is that you have been living in a constant state of low-level threat. Your nervous system has been on guard for decades, scanning for signs that someone might be upset with you, that you might have caused a problem, that you might not be enough. And that state of hypervigilance is exhausting in ways that are almost impossible to articulate. But there is more to uncover, because this defense system does not just drain you, it changes who you become. Now let us go deeper into the hidden mechanics of what happens when niceness becomes your operating system. Because what most people do not realize is that chronic people-pleasing does not just affect your relationships with others. It fundamentally alters your relationship with yourself. There is a concept in psychology called self-betrayal. It is the process of abandoning your own needs, boundaries, and authentic responses in order to maintain external peace. And here is what is so insidious about it. Every time you say yes when your body is screaming no, every time you smile when you want to cry, every time you minimize your own discomfort to maximize someone else's comfort, you send a message to your own psyche. You tell yourself, I do not matter as much as they do. My feelings are not as important. My existence is negotiable. Over time, this creates a psychological phenomenon that Dr. Jonas Webb calls emotional neglect of the self. You become so attuned to everyone else's inner world that you lose access to your own. You stop knowing what you want because you have trained yourself not to want anything. You stop knowing what you feel because you have trained yourself to feel what others need you to feel. You become a sophisticated emotional shapeshifter, and in the process the shape of your actual self becomes harder and harder to find. Neuroscientist Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research on constructed emotion shows us something fascinating about this process. Your brain constructs your emotional experiences based on predictions and learned patterns. If you have spent decades predicting that your emotions will cause problems, your brain starts to suppress your emotional awareness before you even consciously register what you are feeling. You become numb not because you are cold, but because your brain has learned that feeling too much is dangerous. And this creates a particular kind of loneliness that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it. You can be surrounded by people who think they know you, people who love the version of you that you have presented, and still feel completely unseen. Because the real you, the one with needs and boundaries and messy, complicated feelings, has been hidden for so long that even you have forgotten they exist. There is also the phenomenon of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. You hold 2 contradictory beliefs simultaneously. On one hand, you believe you are kind, selfless, and giving. On the other hand, you feel resentful, exhausted, and trapped. And because our brains hate contradiction, you find ways to resolve this dissonance, usually by blaming yourself. You tell yourself you are not trying hard enough, not grateful enough, not evolved enough. You tell yourself that if you were really a good person, you would not feel so tired from helping people. You would not feel so angry about doing things you agreed to do. This is the second piece of our puzzle. The hidden cost of always being the nice one is not just hypervigilance, it is self-abandonment. It is the gradual disappearance of your authentic self underneath layers and layers of accommodation. And what makes this so difficult to see is that from the outside, everything looks fine. You look like someone who has it together, someone who is loved and needed and essential. But on the inside, you are slowly vanishing. Now here is where this pattern reveals its full complexity, because it does not just affect how you see yourself, it affects who is attracted to you and how your relationships function. There is a dynamic in human relationships that operates on the level of energy and reciprocity. The psychologist Dr. Harriet Breaker studied this extensively in her work on people-pleasing and identified something crucial. When you consistently put other people's needs before your own, you inadvertently train people to expect this from you. You create relationships that are structurally dependent on your self-sacrifice. And then, when you try to change, when you try to set a boundary or express a need, the entire relationship destabilizes because it was never built to accommodate your wholeness. This is not because the people in your life are malicious. Most of them genuinely care about you. But they have learned a role in relation to you, and you have learned a role in relation to them. You are the helper, the fixer, the one who is always there. And they are the helped, the fixed, the ones who get to have needs. This dynamic gets so deeply wired that neither of you sees it anymore. It just feels like the natural order of things. But here is what is actually happening beneath the surface. When you cannot stop being nice, you are not just attracting any people. You are often attracting people who need someone to be nice. Empaths attract narcissists is a phrase you see online, but it is not quite accurate. What actually happens is that people with extremely porous boundaries and a high tolerance for discomfort attract people who have learned that their needs are the only ones that matter. It is not about good people and bad people. It is about complementary nervous system patterns finding each other. And this brings us to one of the most painful realizations many chronic people pleasers eventually face. Some of your relationships would not survive you becoming whole. Not because those people do not love you, but because the relationship was never designed to hold two full human beings. It was designed to hold one person who gives and one person who takes. And when the giver stops giving in the same way, the entire structure collapses. Research on codependency, particularly the work of Dr. Pia Melody, illuminates this dynamic. Codependency is not about loving too much. It is about losing yourself in the process of trying to manage someone else's experience. It is about making yourself responsible for other people's feelings while simultaneously denying your own. And it is maintained by a deep, often unconscious belief that love is something you earn through performance rather than something you deserve simply for existing. Remember our question from the beginning? What is the real cost of being the nice one? This brings us closer to understanding. Because what we're really seeing here is not just individual exhaustion, we are seeing the collapse of authentic connection. When you cannot show up as yourself, when you can only show up as the accommodating version of yourself, you are not actually connecting with people, you are performing connection. And performance, no matter how good, is always exhausting because it requires you to be on stage even when you are alone. This is the kind of understanding that changes how you see interactions. If you want more of these insights, share this video with someone who is trying to understand human behavior at a deeper level, and drop a comment below. Tell me which part of this resonates most with your experience. I read every single one. Now, here is where this gets really interesting, because what we have not yet addressed is why it is so hard to stop. Why, even when you see the pattern, even when you understand the cost, you still cannot seem to say no. Let us talk about what happens in your nervous system when you try to break the pattern of chronic niceness, because this is where the neuroscience becomes absolutely critical to understanding why willpower alone will never solve this. When you have spent years or decades being the nice one, your nervous system has associated saying yes with safety and saying no with danger. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal neurological association. Dr. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory helps us understand this. Your vagus nerve, which runs from your brainstem down through your body, is constantly assessing safety and threat, and it does this beneath your conscious awareness. For someone with a people-pleasing pattern, the thought of disappointing someone, the thought of conflict, the thought of someone being upset with you triggers a threat response. Your nervous system interprets it the same way it would interpret a physical danger. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing becomes shallow. You might feel nauseous or dizzy. You might feel a wave of panic that seems completely out of proportion to the situation. And in that moment, saying yes feels like the only way to return to safety. This is why you can know intellectually that you need to set boundaries. You can read all the books and listen to all the advice and still find yourself saying yes when you meant to say no. Your cognitive brain understands the logic, but your nervous system is running a much older, much more primitive program. And that program says, keep the peace or you will not survive. There is also a neurochemical component to this. Research on the brain's reward system shows that acts of giving and helping trigger the release of oxytocin and dopamine, the bonding and pleasure chemicals. For someone whose self-worth is tied to being needed, helping others literally becomes addictive. It is one of the only ways you know how to feel good about yourself. And like any addiction, the tolerance builds. You need to do more, give more, sacrifice more to get the same hit of feeling valuable. But here is the paradox. The more you give from a place of compulsion rather than genuine choice, the less satisfaction you actually feel. There is fascinating research by Dr. Barbara Fredrickson on positive emotions that shows something critical. Genuine pro-social behavior, helping that comes from a place of internal freedom and choice, creates lasting positive emotions and strengthens well-being. But helping that comes from obligation, fear, or the need to manage other people's perceptions of you, creates stress, resentment, and depletion. Your body knows the difference between genuine generosity and self-abandonment, even when your mind tries to tell you they are the same thing. And this is compounded by something psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy. You have invested so much time, so much energy, so much of yourself into being the nice one that changing now feels like admitting it was all wasted. You have built an identity around being helpful, being reliable, being the person people can count on. Who would you be if you stopped? What would be left? This fear of identity loss is one of the most powerful forces keeping the pattern in place. Because you are not just afraid of other people's reactions, you are afraid of your own emptiness. You are afraid that underneath all that performing and accommodating and helping, there might be nothing. No stable sense of self, no inherent worth. Just a void where a person should be. But here is the truth that might change everything. That void you are afraid of, it is not emptiness, it is space. Space for you to discover who you actually are when you are not constantly molding yourself to fit other people's needs. And yes, that discovery process is uncomfortable. Yes, it feels like death sometimes because in a way it is. It is the death of a false self, a protective self, a self that kept you safe when you needed safety, but is now keeping you small when you need space to grow. So back to our original question. What is the real cost of being the nice one? And why does saying yes to everyone else always mean saying no to yourself? Here is what we now understand. The cost is not just time or energy, though those are real. The cost is not just resentment or exhaustion, though those are devastating. The real cost is the loss of your authentic self. It is spending your one life performing a version of you that other people can tolerate while the real you suffocates underneath. And why does saying yes to them mean saying no to yourself? Because you have a finite amount of life force. You have limited time, limited energy, limited emotional capacity. Every yes is an allocation of that resource. And when you allocate all of it to managing other people's experiences, there is nothing left for your own. But here is what is important to understand. Recognizing this pattern is not about becoming selfish. It is not about withdrawing your care or becoming cold. It is about understanding the difference between genuine kindness and compulsive caretaking. Genuine kindness comes from a place of fullness. It is what you offer when you have met your own needs first, when you have maintained your own boundaries, when you are helping because you genuinely want to, not because you are terrified of what will happen if you do not. Genuine kindness can say no because it is not afraid of disappointing people. It knows that real love does not require you to disappear. Compulsive caretaking, on the other hand, comes from a place of fear. It is what you do when you believe your worth depends on being useful. It is what you do when you are more afraid of conflict than you are of losing yourself. And the tragic irony is that compulsive caretaking, despite all the sacrifice involved, does not actually create deep connection. It creates shallow relationships built on a transactional exchange, your self-erasure for their approval. So what does it actually look like to break this pattern? It does not happen overnight. It does not happen because you read something inspiring or make a promise to yourself. It happens slowly, incrementally, through the practice of what I will call compassionate self-reclamation. It starts with noticing, just noticing. Noticing when you say yes, but your body says no. Noticing when you feel resentful. Noticing when you are performing agreeability rather than feeling it. You do not have to change anything yet, you just have to see it. Then it moves to what psychologists call titration. Small, manageable doses of boundary setting. Not going from saying yes to everything to saying no to everything. But finding one small place where you can practice honoring your own needs without catastrophizing the consequences. Maybe it is taking an extra 5 minutes before responding to a request. Maybe it is saying, I need to think about that instead of automatically agreeing. Maybe it is disappointing someone in a low-stakes situation just to learn that you can survive their disappointment. And here is what you will discover, slowly, over time. Most people's reactions to your boundaries are not actually about you. They're about their discomfort with the change. And that discomfort is not your responsibility to fix. You can care about someone and still let them feel uncomfortable. That is not cruelty. That is respecting them as a full human being who can handle their own emotional experience. You will also discover something more profound. Underneath all that niceness, underneath all that performing and accommodating, there is a you that has been waiting. Not a you that has to be constructed or achieved or earned. Just a you that is already there, that has always been there, that is not defined by how useful you are or how much you can give. A you that is enough, not because of what you do, but because you exist. And that self, when you finally let it breathe, when you finally give it space, is not selfish, it is not cold, it is not any of the things you were afraid it would be. It is kind, but its kindness comes from overflow, not depletion. It is generous, but its generosity includes itself. It is compassionate, but its compassion extends inward as much as outward. This is what real kindness looks like, not the performance of niceness that leaves you empty, but the genuine expression of care that comes from a person who is whole. So the next time you feel that familiar pull to say yes when everything in you wants to say no, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, am I doing this from genuine care or from fear? Am I honoring my wholeness or abandoning myself to keep the peace? And whatever the answer is, do not judge it, just see it. Because seeing it is the beginning of choice. And choice is the beginning of freedom. This is the humans we are, where we stop accepting simple answers to complex human experiences. The cost of being the nice one is the loss of yourself. But the gift of reclaiming yourself is a life where kindness and authenticity are no longer in conflict, where you can be generous without being empty, where you can care for others without disappearing. I will see you in the next exploration.